Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast that goes inside the minds of the leaders building our future.
The difficult we do today, the impossible we do tomorrow.
I'm Josh Huggins, founder of GS2, a search firm dedicated to finding the visionaries powering the most critical shift of our time, the US energy transition.
So much of what I do is passion driven because of those experiences.
This season, we're tracing the unique journeys of the architects of America's new energy landscape, exploring how their diverse backgrounds forged the psychology, the ambition, and the brutal truths required to lead in a time of unprecedented change.
If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to be a risk taker, and you got to be able to take calculated risks.
My mission is to uncover the playbook of the leaders in the industry, so we can all learn what it takes to build a world that's truly better than we found it. Hello and welcome back to Better Than We Found It, the podcast where we talk to leaders and innovators building a more sustainable world. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, and today my guest is Kellie Macpherson, an expert in the unseen backbone of the energy transition, which is reliability. While most people focus on solar panels and wind turbines, Kellie ensures they operate safely and securely on the grid. Kellie is the Executive Vice President of Compliance and Security at Radian Generation, and she is one of a handful of women in leadership roles in a highly complex world of NERC compliance. And her journey is a testament to a non-traditional path to success, from studying political science and managing golf course projects to becoming a leading voice in renewable energy. But she did grow up in the industry, with her father helping to draft the very first NERC standards, and she witnessed the California energy crisis firsthand from inside the control room. And today we dig into her fascinating career, the importance of a yes mindset, the leadership lessons learned from managing remote teams, and how she is demystifying the complex world of compliance to fulfill the promise of renewable energy. So let's dive right in. So Kellie, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Josh. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. It's one that's been certainly on the top of the list. So great to sit down with you. I have done a quick intro to you for the audience, but I'm sure I didn't do it justice. So it'll be great if you wouldn't mind, for those who don't know who you are, if you can give a quick introduction to yourself and your role at Radian.
Yeah, I'm the Executive Vice President of Compliance and Security, which means I spend a lot of time making sure that power plants are following the laws and regulations to ensure that they're reliable, and then also ensuring security. And I've been with Radian for over 5 years, and I'm also a mom. I have 2 daughters that are 13 and 7, and we love to ride horses at my house and rodeo. So I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Brilliant. Great stuff. And yes, I've seen a lot of your posts around your daughters and riding and everything. So we'll definitely get into that. And I think for me, actually, if family and upbringing is really where I like to start these conversations to understand the full story. But I was fascinated when we first sat down and you explained about the fact that your father was so prominent in the industry and drafting the first NERC standards. So tell me, how did growing up with grid reliability as a kind of dinner table topic help shape your perspective on the industry and ultimately obviously draw you in?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate. Back before NERC cybersecurity standards are in place, I used to go with my dad to the control room. He was an operator at Southern California Edison for most of my elementary school days. My dad has a really cool story. He actually started with Southern California Edison cleaning boilers out at the ocean water cooled generator plants. And so my dad's truly worked his way up from, doing that work to the control center. And so I was really lucky. I got to go with him to work all the time, and he'd send me over to the Richter scale, and I'd pull the dot from the DOS matrix printer, and I'd pull off the Richter scale and show it to him. I remember really clearly when I was in 7th grade, we had a really significant earthquake in LA, and my dad was at work and I was home babysitting my brother. And I called my dad at work and I was like, "Dad, the power's out." He's like, "I know, I'm working on restoring the grid right now." And that was the Northridge earthquake. Yeah, and it was just one of those interesting moments. The guys in the control center, anyone who had family at home, kind of our scenario, they definitely were working to restore our power quickly so that they didn't have to worry about us and work on restoring the grid. But I was really fortunate to grow up with that and learn a lot of things through osmosis.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose, being part of it, being a topic of conversation and understanding it meant it was kind of ingrained in you fairly early on. But I think you said that your ambition, perhaps when you went to study at college, was in international law. Or explain more what you did and why that was something that you were keen to explore.
Yeah, it's really interesting. My going into my freshman year of high school, California was the first market or first state to deregulate the energy market, and so we moved from Southern California to Northern California, and my dad was the first shift supervisor at the California Independent System Operator. And that was pretty life-changing to go through such a big move, go to high school with people you don't know. But I was really lucky. I continued to, tag along with my dad and, see that process unfold. And so during that time in high school, I went on several mission trips and just started to see what, a real third world a real third world country looks like and what the difference power makes to people. Clean water and power are significant, right? And so I started to understand that. And I started to understand that a lot of the things that, our struggle for power, for folks to get power and new generation is the same in the US as it is anywhere else. It's kind of the process, right? It's the bureaucracy and the laws behind that. And so I went off to college. I did my undergrad at Whitworth in Spokane, Washington. And I studied political science with the idea to go into regulatory law. I've always been really interested in that, working to figure out how to, build out electrical grids and things like that in third world countries. And still to this day, supporting solar sisters that are doing solar lights and different nonprofits and stuff that are working to bring power across, internationally. So something I've been passionate about for a long time.
And from, I suppose, the academic side of that and the things that you learned, how did that layer on top of the experience that you'd already had as a child and understanding? Was there a lot of synergy and crossover? Did it allow you to, I suppose, advance your understanding much quicker into the subject? Or how did that play its part?
Yeah, I think it did help a lot. I think a lot of it though was the passion. The learning wasn't just an academic exercise. I worked at the California ISO during undergrad as an intern. And so I worked in the support of the control center during the energy crisis in California in 2001. And so, I'd be working all day. I'd have people call up and say, hey, I've got this Honda generator. Can I connect to the grid and provide power, right? Because California was going through this thing where you just didn't have enough power for the day, right? You were going to run out of power. There wasn't enough generation. And so that was really interesting, and watched it on the news and things like that. And I remember there's a really significant moment where there was definitely not enough generation. We had imported as much electrons as possible from Washington through COI, from Washington and Oregon, right? We couldn't bring in, there was no more electrons to bring in. And so we were in a situation where the control center was going to have to decide which hospital to take offline for the next 8 operating hours, right? And that was really significant to me because I think a lot of the times we take for granted power, right? That, the electrons are just going to flow and they're just going to be there, right? And so I think that was the summer from my freshman year to my sophomore year in college. And I think that was really transformative because then it changed when you're in school and you're learning about these different things. You actually had this personal experience of how it impacts people, right? And how that makes a difference, and so much of grid reliability is so important. That's what NERC has found on the study of work that I work on every day now, was based on, the straw that broke the camel's back was this East Coast blackout in 2005, where there were fatalities. It was a heat wave in New York in August, and there were fatalities because, of the blackout, right? And so I think when you start to see these real life events that are affected by reliability and availability of generation, right? It changes the academic exercises and it changes kind of how you live your day, right? So at the end of the day, so much of what I do is passion driven because of those experiences.
Sure, yeah, it's that real world human impact, and I suppose you'd already seen it, growing up, and then to go straight in an intern in such a pivotal moment, that will have really resonated, I'm sure, and I'm sure you hold that even with you on a day-to-day basis now. You remember what that was like and how that could be. So I'm keen to understand about the move then into renewables, and of course from a compliance perspective, this being such a new area, of course you were sort of moving into something that wasn't or couldn't be regulated with the current standards or couldn't be audited with the current standards. So tell me about some of those challenges in moving into such a fast moving and new industry, and how did you play your part in the development of those standards and regulations to make sure reliability was there?
Yeah, well, after my undergrad years, I went and I worked for a golf course designer. I think you might have mentioned that already,
Oh
and
yes, yes.
people are probably wondering what the heck. So yeah, I after college, I kind of got burned out a little bit on life, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but I knew that I was really good at project managing things, at being the glue and pulling things together. And it didn't really matter what the subject was, that I could learn the subject, but those were some like work ethic skills that people who didn't necessarily know. And so a friend of mine from high school, and this kind of goes back to like your network is so important, right? A friend from high school introduced me to Kyle Phillips, a golf course designer. I was fortunate enough to come and work for him doing international golf course design, which was really cool because it gave me that international perspective that I really was, looking for. I worked for him for a while. And during that time, my dad was actually the director of NERC compliance at WEC. And so he set up the first compliance audit and conducted, on traditional generation during that time. And of course, my dad and I, whenever we talk, we're always talking shop. I think my kids and my husband are just like, oh gosh, we lost him to the deep, dark hole of work. Like, we don't even know what you're talking about right now. So I was always like in the loop on kind of what was happening in the industry, even though I wasn't in the industry. And so when I turned 26, my dad said, when are you going to get serious about your career? And you need to come work for me and, help me. He was at that time building his own NERC consulting company. And so I went and worked for my dad full time, and he really taught me everything that he knew because he had gone through those first NERC audits as an auditor. He was training auditors. And so to get on the other side of the table as a consultant was such a great opportunity. So I worked for him for 4 years, which is really lovely. I learned so much from him. And then I was recruited by an amazing recruiter. And, shout out to folks that are doing recruiting work. I think if you're looking for a dynamic move in your career, having a partner in that process is huge. And so I worked with a really great recruiter, and they brought me into the renewable space. And, I sat down in the interview, and they started explaining kind of their pipeline and what they had going on. I was like, gosh, you're really going to be the first NERC registered facility, solar facility, because up into that, when they wrote the NERC registration standards, no one thought that solar, let's just start with solar at the maybe wind, maybe people thought wind could, but no one ever thought that solar could be more than 75 megawatts, right? And so that's how they wrote the registration criteria. It was kind of like, we don't want to worry about the solar guys, right? And so I'm sitting in this interview, and they're like going over the pipeline. I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're literally going to have the first solar facility to register. And so that was a really cool opportunity because, you're preparing all the documentation going, gosh, like, my dad always uses the language, put on your auditor hat, right? Like when we're working, we're like, you put on your auditor hat. So I'm like putting my auditor hat on, like working on our policies and procedures and evidence. And I'm like, gosh, like an auditor doesn't actually probably doesn't even know how a PV facility works. They've been doing nuclear or coal or right, like for so long. They're used to this, like, there's a phone cord that you plug in, there's not this like site wireless network that's being remotely operated by, a control center that's 7 states away, right? And so it was a lot of thinking through that. And the first audits and a lot of the first reviews that we went through was really spend our time educating auditors. And I think that's where, I think really the backbone of my career in renewables was built on this idea of like taking really complicated things and making it really simple so you could bridge the gap between these utility folks and the renewable folks, right? And like how they come together and getting them on the same page. Because it's not that renewables don't care about reliability. It's just like a lot of those financial guys that are, in the early days of renewables just didn't understand grid reliability, right? And then utility folks didn't understand the technology. And so you just had to really bridge the gap between the two. And so I think that's where I spent the early part of my career in renewables, was just figuring out a language that was like common between the two and getting folks on the same page. So yeah.
So your so the work you did with your father, this was non-renewables. You weren't working in the renewable market at all. Okay, understood. So this move to renewables, and this is recurrent that you moved to, is that right? So you told me the story, and I'd love you to recount it about your interview when you were thinking and going through that mindset about what you told them around the job description. Would you mind telling that story? Because I think it's a fascinating one for a number of reasons, but maybe tell the story first.
For people who know me really well at work, they're probably not surprised by this story. I sat in the interview, and it was fascinating. Like I said, they'd be like, "Oh, this is your portfolio, right?" And they were explaining to me what they were doing. And like I was asking all these questions to understand the business, and I'm looking at the job description, and it was really written for kind of just like a paralegal type of person to just, kind of like do paperwork, right? Like not like figure out how to actually make anything compliant without any history or whatever. And I was like, as I sat through the interview, and I was like, your job description isn't right. And like, you're not going to get the right type of person. And you actually need this. And like explain to them, you need a director of compliance, and this is the type of experience that you need. And this is the type of responsibilities they're going to have, and I mean, it was really fun. It was in San Francisco on California Street. I took the ferry over. Like, I really enjoyed the interview, but I walked away out, I was like, yeah, they're never going to call me back because I just told them their job description.
How did they take it at the time when was it like a collaborative conversation? Or
yeah, it was super collaborative. Yeah. And they were really nice and they were super appreciative. And you could just tell, there's this look that people have, like I deal with this all the time. Like there's a look when you start talking about NERC compliance to people that they're just like, they're lost, right? They're just, and you're like, oh, okay, like you really don't know. Like I'm pretty sure I gave them my like 5-minute NERC 101 like in the interview because I was like, this is what you're gonna have to do, right? And so it was a really pleasant, like they're really nice people, but I was like that's not how an interview is supposed to go, right? Like I don't know, but I just felt compelled. Like, and I think that's a great thing about renewables is like, we're all here to help each other. Right. So like, I might even have like, to this day, like I might have a sales conversation with them and realize they don't understand something and like explain it all to them and be like, yeah, like I actually can't help you, but like, I'm happy to have spent this 30 minutes to like help you better understand like where you fit in grid reliability. Right. Cause that's the most important part. And I think that's the like passion driven part, mission of what I'm doing. Right. But yeah, it was really funny. I walked out of there and I was like, well, that was a really fun day. I got a really great cup of coffee and I got to take the ferry and, I just like put it out of my mind. And then about a month later, the recruiter called me and was like, so there's a new job description and they would really like you to like consider it. I was like, okay. And so she emailed it over and it was like, oh, they literally like listened, like they took everything that I said to heart and they edited it. And I was like, cool. Like they want to be collaborative. They realize they don't know what they don't know and they really want an expert. And I really liked the people. Right. And the people were great. And so I took the job.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think that's great for a couple of reasons. I think number one, having that confidence to have that conversation in an interview, and clearly you knew you were well informed. It was something that you were very passionate about, so you felt compelled to talk about it. But number two, that they listened and you had a collaborative conversation. But actually, the best part of it all, that I talk to individuals that are in that sort of proactive view of a new role search, is talking to people and going for interviews is such an important part. It might not be the right role for you, but actually for the right company, if you talk to them and they're not quite sure what they want, sometimes roles can be created around you. And if you have that conversation, actually you're front and center. And I'm sure, when the recruiter reached out to you, they had said, if Kellie wants this role, it's going to be hers, because, she knows everything about it. And clearly that's what transpired. So I think it's a really important part of proactive recruitment and how you can do that.
100%. And I tell that story a lot to friends that are starting the job search, and they're like, well, I'd really like to work for this company, but they have this role and it's like kind of adjacent with what I want to do. And I'm like, well, apply, like reach out. Like, you don't know that, like maybe you are the right fit. They just, people call things different. Right. And so sometimes it might be an apples to apples language thing.
Sure. And I think it kind of comes onto your mindset about, saying yes, or the power of yes, and that being a fundamental thing in your career that's helped you advance and progress. Could you just talk a bit about that mindset that you have, and I suppose how not only have you applied it yourself, but how you identify that trait when you're recruiting?
Yeah, I think that's huge. There's so many opportunities that I've had, to be in the control center when those really important things are happening as an intern, right? I was like, yeah, like, I hadn't even told this story. I don't even know if I've repeated it. I just remembered this part of it. But I literally was taking donuts over to the control center and helping with coffee originally, right? Like that, I was doing intern work. And then it turned into oh, hey, can you help us processing this data, right? And can you help us with the board? And then all of a sudden, before I knew it, I was doing operational tasks, right? And I think that's what's so important is you have to be willing to just show up and say yes and then figure it out, right? There's so many things in my career that, were adjacent to what I knew, but I was being asked to pick up on something and jump into something. And I said yes. And I was like, and the answer for me, it's not to be dishonest or to, I've gotten pushback before, the whole fake it till you make it kind of concept. And so just to be really clear, I think it's to say you start with yes, yes, I can take that on for you. And then say, hey, but is it okay if I come back to you with some questions because I haven't done this before, but I'm happy to dig in, right? So you're still being open and transparent, but you're starting with yes. And I think that's where I'm really, when I'm recruiting people, when I'm looking for, associates moving into manager roles or managers moving directors on my team, it's who's saying yes? Who are the people that I can go to that I know are going to step up and be excited, right? That are going to start with yes and then say, yep, I'm willing to come along as a partner and figure it out with you.
For sure. And I think there's a key point that a lot of individuals sometimes or make the mistake that you've highlighted there. One, not perhaps feeling confident enough that they have this skill set to do it, or two, feeling like they will be seen as an imposter if they fail. And I'm sure it's happened to you. It's certainly happened to me in my career. Stepping outside that comfort zone and really pushing yourself into those areas is where you learn the most. And yes, you might make mistakes, and I'm sure we're going to come on to talk about some mistakes that you've made in your career, but those mistakes are the things that make you even better. And if you don't make mistakes, you're afraid to make mistakes, maybe then you can't grow as quickly as others that can. Yeah, sure. So you were with Recurrent. Just briefly, perhaps tell us about the progression there. And I know you had a number of promotions over the years in your time there. How did that go?
Yeah, so I started out with the new version of the job description as the director or senior manager I can't remember exactly, but started kind of at the bottom there with the compliance. And as the portfolio grew, as they grew as a developer, started building the team underneath me. I was really lucky to hire some great people, but I also had to go find my team within the organization as well, right? Who my partners were across the table, like on the asset management team or on the construction team, anyone that was going to help me be successful for compliance, right? That had an input into compliance, building those allies. And I'll tell you, like, some of those folks that I had early on at Recurrent are still my really great friends and I work with on a day-to-day basis across the table. And that's what's, great plug for our industry, right? Is that we're just, it's a really close-knit group. And so built that team out as our portfolio grew, building that out. One of the folks that I recruited, this is a really cool story. Adib on my team now, he's our VP of security at Radian. He actually came in as a temp corporate IT, just a temp worker for a 2-week stint to help offset some staffing issues that we had, and just saw that he had amazing, just a really great work ethic and a really great excitement for what we were doing, and recruited him over to learn about NERC compliance and security. And so spent a good amount of time at Radian, really at Recurrent, all these R names, and really enjoyed that time there, climbing the ladder. I was really lucky. I worked directly for the general counsel, so I learned a lot about contracting. Sitting in a room with lawyers all day long is highly educational. So it was a really great opportunity.
Sure. And then you did make the decision to move on. What were the factors that made that happen? Because I suppose after 4.5 years or so of great success, it must have been a big step to make that move. Why did that come about? And tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I spent a good amount of time at Recurrent, and they were actually acquired by Canadian Solar. And there were kind of some natural just changes to the organization because of that. And for me, I don't know, some people might relate to this, others might not, but there are some boxes that I wanted to check in my career, and I wanted to be a VP of compliance, and, hitting that level was really important to me. And I realized that I just, while Recurrent was great to me, there wasn't room for advancement for me in that next level. And it wasn't a true seat at the table from a leadership perspective. So I actually had a really good friend who I worked with across the table at Recurrent, called and said, we're setting up the O&M department at Cypress Creek, and we're building out a control center to be SIP medium, and we need an expert, and I have a VP of compliance position for you. And so it was really great. I went over to Cypress Creek and stepped into that role and checked a bucket list on the career path, right? And that was a really great opportunity.
Sure. And what was it about becoming a VP of compliance that was so important to you when you sort of think back to that motivation and why that is? Because I'm always interested to find out when it's a progression step, of course, but what did it mean?
At Recurrent, there was this amazing leadership group, and some of the people in the industry that I respect so well, Kate Powers, Arno Harris, Stacy Colby King, were amazing. And, they were VPs, and they had these awesome leadership. I perceived, who knows really behind the closed doors, but they were this, Luke Dunnington. They were these amazing leaders that would sit together and, and figure out how to take care of people well at Recurrent, how to achieve the business plan. They were just so dynamic as leaders. And I wanted a seat at the table. I wanted to learn from those people. I wanted to help shape where a company was going, right? And what the mission was and how we were going to get there operationally, what our values were, all of that. And I wanted to get to experience that and have a seat at the table. And so I perceived that, that really came with that VP role based on the structure, right, that Recurrent had. And so I think that's really where that genesis kind of started for me.
And what was the reality when you became a VP? Did anything change? Was it this eureka moment, or did it flatter to deceive?
No, it's really interesting. I always think about, there's a lot of those sayings that people talk about leadership being lonely and it not, not being all roses and stuff. And that's all totally true. I think it's really interesting. I found in that VP level though, you really have to be, and I'm not talking about like self-confident, but like you have to be confident in your decisions and what you're doing, because like you really have that final say, right? Like you really are like making the final decision. Like people, no one's gonna gut check you on something. Like you're your own gut check, and you've got to just, be able to sit in that, and it was a really great opportunity. I had great leadership at the time that, supported me and had folks to, like bounce things off of. And it was really great. But it's also hard. And there's definitely, I see that now in the current organization I'm in, the bigger we get, the circle is a lot smaller. So yeah.
Sure, I understand. And then it was a short stint at Cypress Creek before you moved to Miller Bros. And I think it was at Miller Bros you mentioned to me around the lesson you learned around remote leadership. But I'm perhaps not sure if I got that right. Maybe you could just share a bit more about this, because firstly, you've explained to me that you work remotely, but I know that in managing a team remotely, there can of course be challenges, and particularly when you're a growing leader. So could you tell us more about that, and also how you approach leading teams remotely now?
Yeah, it was a really interesting time. It was, now post-COVID, I think the world looks really different. And so a lot of the things that were normal to me back then were not normal, right? Like were not necessarily accepted. And so, I'd be in California working, and, our control centers in Durham, North Carolina. A lot of our folks are in Durham, North Carolina, but we also had field techs, right, that were remote kind of at all the different facilities, right? And so that kind of had its own, it was a little bit of this intro of remote work, but it was definitely challenging to figure out how to have those relationships with people. I think that's where I first learned kind of how important a chat tool was. We were in Slack back in those days, but there's something about being able to have that connection with people. And I rely so heavily on chat and text messages now because it's so easy. Someone's East Coast, their day's over. But it's really great to send them a chat and be able to send a chat message and say like, hey, I was thinking about you. Hope your day was good. Didn't actually end up connecting with you today, but they know you're thinking about them. Even if you're, that's the version of like walking by their office window and like waving and smiling at someone on your way out the door, right? Like what's the like electronic like version of that, and like figuring those they're soft things, but they're really important, right? Like the power, like, and I think that's where I've gotten to this point of kind of unapologetically like sharing my life a little bit more like online on LinkedIn, and even with my team, and like sending them a picture from the weekend of my kids doing something cool, because we don't get to see each other, in the lunchroom or whatever and be like, oh, hey, check out these pictures of my kids. And so there's just so much more intentionality that's needed working remotely, right? Like it's just, it's really important. So,
sure. And I think it's a really easy thing to forget, particularly when you're so busy and you've got, projects to meet and demands to achieve. You get kind of fixated on your work, and the team leadership piece can be, as long as people are giving you what you need, you forget to do that check-in and so on. Whereas when you're in the office with people every single day, it's much easier to do that. So, what would you say to somebody who's stepping into a role for the first time where they're leading a remote team? What would you say as a tip or two that you would advise?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of listening that has to happen, and you have to like figure out what the natural culture is before you step in. I've watched, it's interesting. I've watched 2 new people on my team over the last month, kind of like adapt in, right? And one you can tell kind of came in with some assumptions and, is a lot, right? And was like very loud, and you're like, like I didn't need you to pause, right? And then the other person, you can tell that they like spent 2 weeks like, like listening and hearing how things were, and now they've like definitely picked up on our cultural cues and are in a really great, in a really great place. And and so I think a lot of it is taking that, they hired you for a reason. they know you're an expert, or they know there was something in you that they were excited about, right? It is a lot of energy and time and money to hire somebody, right? Like, it is a pain in the butt. Like, it is like, that they went through that effort to get you an offer, to sell HR, to sell leadership on you and your skills, and then to get you an offer letter and get that over, and then to get your computer set up and do all the things for you to get there. They believe in you, right? They're excited about you. Like, they went to bat to get you there. Be confident in that, right? And don't feel like you need to come in and prove yourself right away. You need to come in and be in watch and listen mode and hear what's going on. And, and you don't need to, jump to like, let me prove myself right away. I think that's, you know what I mean? Like, there's this like confidence factor that people struggle with when you're starting a new job.
Yeah, particularly when you're remote and therefore you can't, be there impressing someone so much. Is like those moments you get, you don't want to put too much importance on them. Otherwise you might come off in a way that's actually not going to be as positive as you'd like it to be. Sure, I get that. So moving on and completing the story then into Radian now. So firstly, I'm keen to understand what it was that really stood out to you about Radian Generation's mission, and why you decided to join, and then we can go on from there about more around your role. But
yeah.
how did they attract you?
Well, I knew people that were working at Radian. A good friend of mine from Recurrent, one of those VPs, was at Radian, and he texted me and was like, "Hey, would you come to Oakland and have a meeting, sit down with us? Like, they're thinking about exploring NERC services and adding that in. Like, they need to understand." And I was like, sure. Like, and he's like, can you just, chat with them? And so I wasn't sure if it was even totally a job interview as much as it was like the friend request, right? Like, they wanted the business plan. And so I think we sat in our it's now closed post-COVID, but the Oakland office at the time, Radian, and this is so silly, but so sat in the room and used the whiteboard, and I still have the whiteboard. We closed the Oakland office and I kept the whiteboard, and I have it in my office here because it's kind of special, which seems silly, but I stood at the whiteboard in the Oakland office looking out at the Ferry Building and the bay, and it was just a really cool spot. But walked them through, this is a business plan. This is what it would look like. If you guys add NERC services, this is what, literally penciling out on the whiteboard, like, this is what you would charge. And this is, if you got this many clients, and, if I was you, these are the clients that I would go after right away. And, and just walked them through that. And, didn't really know what I was coming into, but, it kind of probably really similar to Recurrent, where you just like, you have this meeting and you share all this information and you're like, I don't really know what's going to come of it, but, I did my good deed and shared the information. And so then had a series of conversations with Joe Kastner, who's one of the original 4 founders of Radian. He started Radian with these other folks that the other founders, they came out of the finance background, and he's a data scientist, 100%. I made this mistake of like calling him a finance guy before. And I just want to really clarify, he is a data scientist at the end of the heart. But the idea was all these renewable assets were being built by finance folks, right? So like you'd have these really great asset managers working at like Wells Fargo and Make Up America, but they're like one person, for so much work, and and the rest of the folks are all financing folks, right? And so you have this kind of finance perspective. And so Radian was built on this idea that we need to fulfill on the promise of renewable energy, which is that these plants are actually functional, that they provide, electrons to the grid in a reliable manner, and they're actually fulfilling the business plan, right? And to do that, you actually need to have like a full asset management team. You need technical asset management, financial asset management, compliance management, right? Like all these pieces together. And no one was really doing it when Radian started in 2012. No one was really doing that. They were really, it was this one guy at Wells Fargo, or it was just one guy at Morgan Stanley or whatever. It wasn't really this like concentrated work. And so that's what Radian was built on. And so then, fast forward to 2019, they were realizing how important compliance was. And so then I sat in that room and walked them through what, building compliance and security business would look like. and just had a series of conversations. You know, at the end of the day, Radian's mission, I don't know, I can't remember if I shared this with you before, but Radian's mission, is to fill in the promise of renewable energies. Our value is to be kind and respectful. That's number one. And then there's a couple more bullet points after that, but they don't roll off the tongue as well. And so I'm constantly talking about being kind and respectful, and they were kind and respectful. And there's something about that culture that's so attractive, right? And I even use that with my kids now these days. And I'm like, hey, what you just said was not kind, nor was it respectful to your sister. Like, you need to try again, right? It's become like embodied, like part of who I am and how I parent and my whole life, those values that we have as a company. But, I'd be talking to Joe and through this process, and he's at the soccer field with his kids, and I had come from this place of working remotely and as a woman trying to build up my career and everything. I felt this pressure that I had to make sure my kids were really quiet and that people didn't know that I had kids, right? And then I'm talking to this really well-respected person in the industry, and he's not apologizing that he's at his kid's soccer game talking to me. And I was like, but they're also doing great work and they're not slackers, right? They're doing incredible stuff. And I was like, this is a place where I could hang my hat and be really, really happy at for a long time and build a great business. And they respected me and were excited. And I think that entrepreneurship and just perspective is incredible. And I'm really fortunate to be here.
For sure, yeah. And it sounds like they've really already back then had their what we call the client EVP that we work a lot with our customers on, ensuring they can accentuate the positives of their brand and who they are and what they stand for and what they believe in. But some companies and some founders and leaders just get it and they understand that's so important to them, and others perhaps take a bit longer. But it's clear that from that conversation you really learned it. I wonder though, the success rate of individuals in roles, when you look at your career and the two what it seems like most successful places you've been, which is Recurrent and Radian, are where you've been in those conversations, where the interview have been more conversational and you've been able to sort of co-create the role, versus roles that are already predefined and trying to find the right person for them. It would be an interesting exercise to look across the industry to see, what success is when you co-create versus when it's already created. But it sounds you can understand the reason why co-creation works so well, because both parties come together to agree on what's right for both of them. So fantastic story, and I think really, really clear to see why you then joined. The growth at Radian from the outside looking in, it looks like it's been astonishing. I think you said to me it was something like 75% year-on-year growth. Clearly the headlines sound incredible, but it's never a straight line. It's never so easy. If you were to say one brutal truth around how you sustain that growth, or perhaps what you've got wrong in the short term to get to where you are now, what would you put that down to, or what's the truth that sits behind it?
We miss things. And, I've had a few significant folks leave the team because you missed and maybe it's that people are there for a season, right? And their season's over. But sometimes I wonder, did I miss the signs of burnout, or did I miss the signs? I work really hard to make sure folks have a career path when they work on my team, right? They know what the next thing is. I know what they're passionate about. I know what they want for their career. And I'm, without vision, man will perish, right? I believe that with my whole heart. And I want everybody on my team to have a vision for where they're headed, whether that's with Radian or not, right? Because that's the circular kind of effect of renewable energy. I have 6 people on my team right now that I've worked with at 3 different companies. The renewable world is small. And so that's where it's I think as leaders, we have a huge responsibility to understand what people want to do with their life and with their careers, and to support them no matter what, right? And that may be that I don't have the right place for them, but I know somebody that does. I'm going to make the connection, and we're going to figure that out for them. Or it's that they need to go, they want a certain certification. So we're going to figure out how to get that in the budget. And it may be well, it's August, like I can't get that in the budget for this year, but January 1, 100%, like let's go do it. Right. And figuring out those things. And I think as much as you strive, there are times where you miss it, and I started this Power Play newsletter on LinkedIn back in October. We had gone through kind of a hard exit of a really significant leader, someone that was a really close friend of mine. And I missed that he was burned out, right? Like I didn't appreciate it. Like I knew there were things, like it was a hard season, right? Building and that growth is hard to sustain. It's really, really hard. And I missed it. Or I saw parts of it, but I missed we're to the exit point of the burnout, right? Like I kept thinking I had more time, right? But it got to the irreversible place. And so I spend a lot of time on the Power Play newsletter now talking about how as a leader, I'm looking out for people, and this is where I'm different. I don't check a lot of corporate boxes in my leadership style. I have a really key leader on my team who is a good friend of mine. Everyone who works for me, I consider a friend on some level, right? Like we're going to spend time together. Like we're going to know each other, right? Like I care about everybody. But a really important leader on my team. And I said, I had the kind of conversation. I was like, hey, have you been to the gym lately? Right. Cause I know that's important to him. I know that's part of him taking care of himself. I was like, no. And I was like, okay. What meetings are getting scheduled too early in the morning that are getting in the way of you going to the gym and taking care of yourself? Because he has a newborn at home and a 2-year-old at home, and he's got a lot of pressure, right? And at the end of the day, like I want him to be healthy because I want him to keep doing that role, right? But it's like holistically looking at somebody. And sometimes you miss that, right? Like you miss, and you have to be inquisitive. Like you really have to go figure it out so you don't miss it. But I've missed it,
But I suppose, and I completely agree. I completely agree with you. But I suppose also playing devil's advocate to your point earlier in the conversation around sort of saying yes and speaking up, how much of that responsibility sits with the leader, but also how much of that responsibility sits with the employee, not just about, I suppose, kind of burnout and boundaries and health and fitness, but also career progression and development. And how do you get the balance right? Because you can't spoon feed everyone everything. Otherwise, as a leader, you're burnt. So how do you get that balance right? And what's the way you set the right level of expectation?
Yeah. I think, we do those check-ins, right? Like it had been a while since we talked about health or whatever, right? And so we're having that conversation and going back, and figuring that out and checking in. But at the end of the day, like I know he's going to say yes to what I need. And so that empowers me to like build his career for him, right? And I think that's where, I had mentioned to you, we have someone on our team who's just been amazing. He came out of UNR's cybersecurity program and he was looking for a job. And I was like, hey, we do security. He didn't really know what he wanted to do with his career, but like I knew there were projects that he could work on. And he had graduated from UNR at the beginning of this, in May. And he was, we always joke, we call him the breadstick slinger. He was working at Olive Garden, and that's like the joke now. But yeah, and he was working at Olive Garden while he was trying to find like his real, his real job at a college.
Sure.
And I was like, hey, come work for me, come, like this will be really good. A few years later, I mean, he is running, project managing a $5 million a year revenue customer, right? And killing it. I mean, my biggest concern right now is that customer is going to try to steal him from me, right? Because he's doing such a great job. But he always starts with yes. Like I know it can be 5:00 on a Friday and something really critical happens, but I can reach out to him and be like, hey, this is super critical. I need your help. And he's going to say yes, right? And he's going to help me. I also know that he's going to take his vacation and turn his phone off, right? And that's the balance, right? Is that when you're here, but you also have that balance of like, I'm taking care of myself, or to say like, hey, I'm at the gym. I will be online in an hour and I'm happy to dig into whatever you need. And I think that's the nice balance of it, right? And even for me to say like, hey, I've got a kid thing this afternoon. Can you take this for me and I'll trade you for this, right? Like, and having that, like, it's a team. So.
Yeah, for sure. But it's about, I suppose, the leader creates the environment where people feel comfortable to do that. But then the individual does have a responsibility to speak up. Otherwise, you might not know. And even if you ask and they downplay,
they're gonna tell you.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose getting into some finer points around Radian, or I suppose the work that you do in the work you do, and I suppose the unique vantage point that you have in terms of how you see the industry. You see a lot of the vulnerabilities the grid has that maybe others that sit in other areas don't. Well, clearly security is a extremely high concern. But what's one area that perhaps is not so obvious to people that are driving some of the decisions that you make when you think about what else is important from a vulnerability perspective?
Yeah, I think people don't realize how interconnected we are. And that, I don't know, just not to be super dark, but like there's state sponsored terrorism, right? Like we are under attack. The grid is under attack, regardless of it just being the United States. Like in Europe, it's under attack, right? Like when we go back to like kind of in the beginning of this conversation, how important power is, right? So if you start to think about that, like if you're really going to affect a foreign adversary, gosh, the power grid is a really like significant way to really affect, right? Like to like have a super negative effect, right? And so I think we don't appreciate like how much it is under attack, right? And so we spend, all of the time, we spend so much time looking at intrusion detection and like understanding, we're having constant vulnerabilities, constant attacks on these power plants. We have a power plant that has over 1,000 intrusion types a day, right? And you're working to like ensure that it is safe and reliable, but you don't realize the interconnectedness of it. And I think that's a lot of the body of work that's going to happen in the regulatory space for the next year is securing, these control centers that are controlling, thousands of gigawatts of facilities, are these sticking main vulnerability points, right? And really ensuring cybersecurity. When I first started in NERC, we were talking about like, oh, you grab the telephone cord and you plug it in, right? And for 5 minutes to like share some data, and then you unplug the telephone cord and you're like, there's no that's the only interconnected device at the coal power plant. And now, you can remotely turn, we did a white hat pen testing on a site about 10 years ago. So think about that, it's 2025. So 2015, did some pen testing, white hat pen testing. They were able, through the LinkedIn password vulnerability that happened, they were able to access someone's LinkedIn to then access that password was the same and use that on the corporate email to then get into the corporate network, to then get the SCADA drawings and the single line drawings, to then get into a 100 megawatt site down in Southern California and put their cursor over the main circuit breaker. Like they could have chipped the site offline. And that's what people don't always appreciate that, like there really are true security risks, right? And so at the end of the day, what we're doing is so important,
Particularly with how technology is advanced. So in 10 years, I think how much technology is advanced. So staying ahead of that is so crucial and important. Yeah, I can really see the drive there. So that means big opportunity for Radian in terms of being able to help organizations with that. What's something else that's on the horizon for you? Is there anything else that's regulatory that's coming up, or from a compliance perspective, or maybe even from technological perspective that you need to be mindful of or aware of?
Yeah. So remember how I mentioned the whole 75 megawatt thing and never thought a solar site could be that big?
Yes.
Okay. So the other side of that was they also never thought that solar could really affect reliability. And I should say renewables, right? That variable generation. So wind, solar, battery storage, right? That they would ever be big enough to affect grid reliability. Well, there's been so many events that have happened, right? There was the Blue Cut Fire in California in 2018, Winter Storm Uri. There's been so many things where we've seen that renewable generation has reached a large enough portion of the generation on the grid that now renewable energy actually does affect grid reliability, right? And so they are actually lowering the threshold for NERC reliability for the NERC standards. So before, if your site was connected at 100 kV and 75 MVA megawatts, then you had to follow these laws. Well, now they're changing it to 20 megawatts connected at 60 kV because they realized that there was a reliability gap, that all those sites between 20 megawatts and 75 megawatts start to add up and really can, if they're not all following a voltage schedule, you have like mass chaos as a grid, as a grid operator trying to operate the grid correctly. And so we're seeing a big change in that. And so there's a big rush now for folks to be compliant by May of 2026 with those new standards and implement compliance programs and stuff. And that's our everyday right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's so many complex challenges in the energy transition, and it's it feels sometimes a bit like an uphill battle from everybody I talk to. But on a positive perspective, what part of the industry gives you hope or optimism for the future, despite the current landscape politically? What gives you hope for the future of the industry?
I feel like a battery storage company is to hire me as like their spokesperson. I think battery storage, think about it, the biggest pushback that we got from solar and wind was it's variable. You can't rely on it. So, you're sitting at the California ISO building your generation stack for the next hour, right? And then you're building your next 4-hour generation stack, right? Like how are we going to meet the generation demands for the next 4 hours? You're like, well, it's the middle of the night and I don't know if there's going to be wind. So like, there goes all those assets, right? Oh, it's the middle of the night. Like can't use the solar asset, right? Like, and that was always a pushback. But now with the application of battery storage and even the co-located, like the hybrid sites where you have solar and batteries together or wind and batteries together is significant. And it's significant because it allows that 24/7, right, opportunity to meet those generation needs. It's the same. This is where I think it's super cool, but this makes me like a total reliability geek. But, the way California survived the energy crisis was the pumped hydro storage projects in Southern California, where CDWR would go and they would dump water and then have generation, right? And that was a big part of getting through that energy crisis. What does batteries do? The same exact thing. Batteries start dumping electrons to the grid when you need generation. And so I think I'm really excited about where we're headed with battery storage. I think it's the absolute perfect complement to what we need. And I think when you get into the political landscape and you get into like the big, beautiful bill and all the things that we're seeing politically in the United States right now, we're seeing such an opportunity where battery storage has kind of been carved out from all of that. And so we're going to see the advancement of that. I think you see places like Japan where they've changed the PPA structure so that, we're in this incredible place where battery storage, is making, so much more dollars per megawatt hour. The same that we're seeing in Australia, right? Like we're seeing regulators, the AESO has gone above and beyond to bring on battery storage in Australia. And that's incredible, right? Like, and it's definitely opening doors that we haven't ever seen. When's the last time Japan, was willing to open their PPA structure? 15 years, a long time, right? And so it's really cool. I think battery storage is opening up doors that we've never seen open before.
For sure. And we're seeing it from our side, even from a recruitment perspective, the impetus, the clients that are growing and expanding are all in the, either co-located or fully in the battery storage space. And it's such a sign of and a time of optimism despite the backlash, which I think is really helpful to sustain everything through. But really interesting companies and technologies that are happening there that can do so many cool things. Lastly on you, before we move on to some quick fire and then we'll wrap up. Something that stood out to me, and the reason why I was really interested in talking to you was I'd seen on a number of occasions you be very prominent on LinkedIn, and I think it's just something I just wanted to come back to, because as part of the growth of your career, I always talk to anyone I talk to who's an aspiring executive, you should be thinking about spending at least 5% of your time on building your brand and building your network and focusing on that. But there was a particular moment in your career where being more prominent on LinkedIn was a turning point for you. Maybe you could just share that and perhaps just give some of the outputs that have come from your from the work that you've done in putting yourself out there.
I always wanted to have a voice on LinkedIn, but I didn't necessarily feel qualified, right? Like I was looking for somebody else to tell me that I was like qualified, that I should be saying something, even that like I could say something on behalf of the company, right? Like but I always wanted to. And so the last time RE Plus was in Vegas, we're coming up on another. RE Plus is always like my LinkedIn anniversary. So back in September of 2023 at RE Plus, I had a really significant leader tell me, that I didn't have a voice and that I wasn't an expert in the field, and I shouldn't be, doing interviews, and that I shouldn't be representing anybody. And I was like really frustrated. At the time I had like 500 connections on LinkedIn, I think. And I just was like, gosh, like, I just don't think that's true. Right. Like, and I was like, yeah, I can have all this self-doubt and imposter syndrome, and I can go down a black hole of all of that for sure. But I was like, but no, at the end of the day, like, I know what I'm doing is significant, and I know that people like appreciate like my encouragement. Like, and I know that other moms want to hear from other moms. I knew that was true. And I knew I could talk about NERC compliance in a way that like helped people understand, and like grid reliability that like is unique. Like, it's just like a special talent, I guess, that I have to like explain really hard, weird things to people in a way that they understand. Like, I've always gotten the feedback. I was like, okay, I can stand on those two things. And so I left RE Plus in 2023, and I was like, I'm going to post every day on LinkedIn from now until January 1st, and we'll just see what happens, and it was incredible. And the cool part about it is I just started being really honest and like sharing my life on there and sharing what's happening in the industry. And I actually have an album on my phone. I take screenshots when people send me, messages about, I really needed to hear this today, or I had a really rough day. Thank you for sharing. Like, I needed to hear that. And so many of those types of messages. And so I got to January of 24, and I was like, gosh, like, I think this is like a real deal. And, I don't need anyone to give me permission. Like, I just need to press in. And this is where I should be spending my time. Right. So I don't know, I think we're like 11,000 followers now or something in the community, and we have a couple newsletters and the podcast and all of the things. And it's just an incredible community, right? And it's been such a blessing to be able to support people and all of that. And but at the end of the day, like, no one gave me permission. And every once in a while I check in and say like, hey, do you still want me doing this? Like, and everyone looks at me like, you're insane. Like, why would you ask us that question? Right. And you're like, well, like, because, it's hard. Like, you still like want someone to like give you permission, but really these types of things, building a personal brand, stepping into a leadership role, no one is going to give you permission. And I think that goes back to the say yes thing, right? Like you've got to step into each opportunity that you have, and just be bold and confident on LinkedIn, right? And just like step into it. And all of a sudden you're going to look back in 10 years and be like, whoa, like, we did something really cool.
Yeah, exactly. Give them the business plan at the interview stage. Pitch the business plan at the interview stage, whatever it might be. But no, it's so true. And I know that you're extremely happy at Radian and doing great stuff.
Yeah.
But also, I think when you build your personal brand, the opportunities for your career development, if you're at that stage, come along. If somebody was thinking about compliance or security in renewables, there is no doubt that conversation happens without your name being in that room, and that comes from you not being in the room, but just from the brand that comes with it. And I think that's a really important part of taking control of your career and creating the opportunities that clearly just would not be there if you were still doing the great work you're doing, but just not shouting about it, and bringing your whole self to work and allowing others to do so. So yeah, I just wanted to give you props on that, but also explain why I think it's so crucial to anyone that's aspiring to share and to do that. And it might feel a bit cringy and strange at first, but from my own experience, I know that by the end of it, you don't care. And it's, as you say, it's osmosis. It just happens. And then people come to you, and then you become part of this community you didn't even know existed. So
just hit post and walk away, and we'll post the next day and walk away, and do that for 2 weeks, and then look at what people said.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, good stuff. So really quickly, to finish off, got a few quick fire questions to run through with you. So, firstly, on leadership, what's one book that every leader should read?
How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I'm making my 13-year-old read it right now.
Yes, very good book.
I stand behind that one.
For sure. And if you were to have to describe NERC compliance in one sentence, this is a good test, given how you said you can articulate it easily. How would you describe it?
These are the laws you have to follow to make sure electrons actually get to your house.
Great. We talk about saying yes a lot, but what about something that you've recently said no to?
Oh gosh. I've said no to a few different travel this year, and that was really important. I needed to be in my business and be with my family.
Who's a leader that you admire the most?
Oh, Joe Kastner, our CEO, for sure. And that's not to be like a silly like plug or anything like that. Like I said, he talked to me at the soccer field.
Sure. What do you think is the most underestimated trait of a successful leader?
Humility and kindness.
Yes. And I always talk about the best parts of people's job, but what about the least favorite parts of your job today?
HR.
Yeah, I understand. If you weren't in
There's a lot of
energy,
red tape.
yeah, if you weren't in energy, which it feels like you were destined to be, but if you weren't, what would you be doing?
Oh, I don't know, something creative or I don't know. In this new world, I wish I was like a pickup man for a rodeo, riding horses all the time. I don't know.
Yeah. And lastly, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Just to be true to yourself. And yeah, that's an Abby
Excellent.
Hopper one for sure.
Great. So as you know, the podcast is called Best Than We Found It. It's all about thinking about your impact in the world. And when you get to that point where you step away from your corporate career and you look back on everything that you've achieved, what do you hope that your legacy will be to know that you left the world better than you found it?
Yeah, I want that bridge between renewables and utilities to be real, and I want renewables to take NERC compliance seriously. Every time I see NERC compliance risk listed in an EPC agreement or an O&M agreement or an LGIA, I get excited because that means we're really influencing it and people know that it's important because it translates to grid reliability.
Brilliant. Well, I have no doubt you'll be successful in that. So
Yes.
good luck with the mission. You mentioned you're really active on LinkedIn. If people have listened today that haven't heard of you before or keen to reach out and connect, is that the best place for them to get in touch with you?
Yes. And I really do look at my DMs. So please reach out that way for sure.
Wonderful. Well, look, thank you so much for your time and being generous with it. It's been fantastic conversation. I've learned a lot myself as well, which is great. And I'm sure others will. So we really appreciate your time. Look forward to checking in soon. And best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
Kellie's story is a powerful lesson that the path to leadership isn't always linear. It's about recognizing an opportunity, having the courage to say yes, even when you don't have all the answers, and the diligence to become an expert in a field that others perhaps find intimidating. And I think what stands out to me is her passion for the human side of this technical world. Her focus while sitting in compliance isn't just on regulations. It's about building teams and finding talent in unexpected places. And it's the ability to see the raw potential in people and knowing they've got the DNA to become an amazing project manager. It really is a powerful reminder that building a reliable energy future is not just about the technology and the infrastructure. It's all about identifying and empowering the right people. And that's the test of leadership. And that's how you truly leave an industry better than you found it. Thank you so much for listening to Better Than We Found It today. To learn more about Kellie's work, please find her on LinkedIn. And if today's conversation resonated with you, please share the episode with a friend or colleague, as it's the best way to support the show. And until next time, take care. Thank you for listening to Better Than We Found It. These conversations are a powerful reminder that while emerging technology is crucial, having leaders with the conviction and resilience to see it through is the only way we will deliver what is required. This podcast is powered by GS2, where our mission is to build the leadership teams that are shaping the future. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, and the conversation doesn't need to end here. Please connect with me on LinkedIn to continue the discussion. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show so you never miss what's next. And until next time, let's all work to leave our world a little better